Week 2 has left just as quickly as it came, so we are here with the top 10 takeaways from Week 2. Welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast. It is me, Cameron Lawrence, along with Mr. Tyler Plapp, who is all swagged out of knocking his starts out of the park last week. I'll give him his soapbox here in just a second. But before that, make sure you are subscribed to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening, or if you're on YouTube, subscribe and hit those notifications because we are coming out with so much content for you guys. It is getting ridiculous at this point. But today, we are breaking down the 10 things that you need to know from Week 2. And Ty, I don't want to waste any more time, so let's get into this thing.
Let's do it.
All right, Ty, I alluded to it earlier, but you're all swagged out today. Can you just tell us why you're rocking the Pit Vipers?
Okay, because look, I gotta just show off the success, show off what it looks like when you are just absolutely perfect in every fantasy football take you ever have. I'm kidding. I definitely got something wrong, but when it comes to starts of the week and my 4 from last week, nailed every single one of them. And what can I say? I'm just feeling myself a little bit. That's all I'm doing.
Feeling yourself. Yeah, he had the Tyler Lockett, he put out Mike Evans as well.
James
Cook, Anthony Richardson on TikTok. Was that your Twitter start of the week as well, Anthony Richardson?
Richardson, Cook, Lockett, and Sam Laporta, who put up 11 fantasy points.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. I mean, Gardner Minshew had 11 fantasy points. If Richardson plays that whole game, he's probably the quarterback 1 on the week.
Oh, totally.
At least quarterback 2. So
totally,
that's what we love to see. But we love to share the successes, but we also want to give the people what they came here for. So Ty, kick us off with your number 1 takeaway.
Oh, and it's my favorite player in fantasy football right now. He's everyone's favorite player in fantasy football right now. It's Puka Nacua. And look, Puka Nacua is him. He set the record for most receptions by a rookie in his first 2 games over the likes of Anquan Bolden, some other guys, but I noticed Anquan Bolden. Yes. And for whatever reason, I always see Anquan Bolden thrown around in a lot of fantasy circles and stuff because there is something to be said about Anquan Bolden and being compared to him in fantasy. So that only helps out the case for Puka. And so far this year, Puka has 5 more receptions than the next guy, who is Justin Jefferson, but he also has 10 more targets than the next guy, who is also JJ. But back to Puka, that is literally like a whole game's worth of receptions and targets ahead of the next guy. And the pace that he's on is outrageous. I think you sent it earlier. He's on pace for 300 targets at this point. It's absurd.
Yeah.
Now, we do need to pump the brakes a little bit because there is a guy named Cooper Kupp that is still on the team, who is still on IR. But at least for right now, just enjoy the success. I certainly am, because I drafted him pretty much in every single league. And that's another reason for
yes, sir.
feel myself today. But look, Puka has solidified himself pretty much as a wide receiver 2 in your lineup, wide receiver 1 even, just based on volume. We'll see what things look like when Cooper Kupp comes back. But man, Puka is him.
He sure is. And I've seen a lot of people going, he's in the Cooper Kupp role. Close. He's getting Cooper Kupp usage. He's in a different role than Cooper Kupp, which I actually think is more exciting, because that means when Cooper Kupp is coming back, he's not just going to replace Puka Nacua. They're going to be able to play together on the field at the same time. And the other thing that's pretty exciting, Tutu Atwell is a top 15 wide receiver right now. Mm-hmm. Matthew Stafford is showing you, hey, I am targeting a guy at all-time rates right now, and I can still support another top 15 wide receiver, which I think gives you hope for Puka Nacua when Cooper Kupp does come back. So, Tyler, I couldn't agree more. This dude has been on fire, and I think at this point, we all just got to jump on the bandwagon.
Absolutely. You have to. I mean, if you're not on the Puka, I've seen some people in the social media realm literally give Puka the nickname Pook, or Pook. It's Puke Nacua. And whoever those people are,
clowns.
Just fade them into just eternity, because Puka is that guy.
Yes, you got to talk about your favorite wide receiver takeaway. So I'm going to talk about my favorite wide receiver takeaway, and that is
we kind of share this because we all had the same opinion.
It is, and that is the fact that Keenan Allen is not washed. 8 receptions on 10 targets, 111 yards, and 2 touchdowns for a wide receiver 1 finish. He finished higher than Puka Nacua last week, who had 15 receptions. This guy is doing pretty well. He's a wide receiver 5 on the year so far with 23 fantasy points per game. And he is easily 9 targets and 11 targets in his first 2 games. Easily the number 1 target on this Chargers offense. And I think they're just starting to get going. I think they still have some little bumps in the road. But Tyler, you brought up an interesting point earlier to me, and I just want you to expand on just some of the complexities of this Chargers offense.
So, friend of the show, Josh Norris of Underdog Fantasy, he tweeted out earlier on Monday afternoon that just because Josh Kelly only put up 39 yards does not mean like Joshua Kelly's a horrible player or anything like that. What it actually means is that Kellen Moore is going to come up with a game plan that stays away from the strength of the opposing defense. And you look at this past matchup against Tennessee, their one strength on defense is their run defense. So there was ample opportunity for Keenan Allen. There's ample opportunity for Mike Williams, who saw 13 targets. And, I want to give credit to Cameron because Mike Williams is going to have a good week, and he did. So when it comes to Chargers receivers, I think that statement is more true for Mike Williams than it is Keenan Allen, because we know Keenan Allen as the route runner. And if there is a wide receiver to trust, you trust the route runners because the release off the line of scrimmage, the release off of coverage, that's what separates them, gets them open for quarterbacks to hit them, versus Mike Williams, who could pop off in certain matchups. He's the downfield guy. So Keenan Allen, we were trying to tell you guys, he's still the guy.
Yep.
No, he's too old, or no, he always gets injured. You guys are reeling a little bit now.
Yeah. No, we're definitely riding high on that. And so we're going to talk about one of the passing offenses in the Chargers that we were most excited for. Now we're going to transition to a passing offense that we definitely weren't nearly as excited for. We knew that one of these guys was a sleeper. But Ty, why don't you talk about these Texans wide receivers a little bit? Did not think that these guys would be one of our top takeaways, but here they are.
Yeah, Nico Collins and Tank Dell, and I might as well throw in Robert Woods, because Robert Woods has 19 targets through the first 2 games. Like, hello.
Yes.
Like, I thought Robert Woods was on the decline, but I guess not. So, after this week, Nico Collins, he solidified flex status moving forward between the amount of targets he's getting, the yards, found the end zone against the Colts. He's pretty much solidified as a flex moving forward, because the Texans have thrown the ball at least 44 times in both their games so far this year. And now, do I expect that to continue? Probably not. I mean, I don't think anyone saw the Texans throwing the ball more than 40 times, if that, at like 35. That being said, though, Nico Collins has pretty much solidified himself as I shouldn't say go-to guy, but the guy that's going to be the most productive out of all these receivers.
Especially in the red zone.
Exactly. But the other guy that deserves his flowers is Tank Dell. And Noah Brown went on IR last week, and it was reported shortly after that Tank Dell was going to see an expanded role because of that. And it did expand. The guy had 10 targets. He had 20 fantasy points. He found the end zone, 7 receptions. Here's the other thing, too. He outsnapped Nico Collins. Now, I didn't watch the game closely enough. I don't know if Nico Collins left for a little bit, and so then it was just Robert Woods, Tank Dell. But the takeaway that I explained in my waiver video, because Tank Dell was in the waiver video, there is value in finding the speedy, the quick, the savvy route runners, your Deontay Johnsons of the world. your Keenan Allens of the world, your Tank Dells of the world. Because when you have a quarterback in a situation like Houston with CJ Stroud, Stroud is just going to be looking for the guy that gets open the quickest, right? Mm-hmm. He may try to force balls every now and then, which I would expect for a rookie, but CJ Stroud is going to also find the guys that separate from their defenders a lot better. Tank Dell does that because he is quick and savvy in his route running. So both guys have fantasy value. We probably need to see another week from Tank Dell before we start considering him in a starting lineup. But Nico Collins, he's for sure a flex play moving forward, just because we were saying he's the late round sleeper that you guys need to be targeting in drafts, because there was always this possibility of him producing like this. And sure enough, he has been.
For sure. And just reading off some of CJ Stroud stats, 58 completions on 91 attempts so far, 626 yards, was his fourth right now, but he's taken 11 sacks. So this Texans O-line is not phenomenal by any means. And so it really supports what you're saying, Tys. He's going to be more of a one-read guy. So when you got a guy like Tank Dell who's quick and can get open, he's going to look there. And I think that's going to also benefit Nico Collins, where he's going to start the way it's been going. He's going to start trusting Nico Collins more and more with jump balls, tight windows. And so I think both of these guys are actually going to benefit more from it being a quicker release than maybe a guy like a Robert Woods, who later down the road, isn't quite as quick as he once used to be.
Yep. And you can see just how I use this rhetorically, how good or I should say sarcastically, how good the Texans offensive line is. Because Dameon Pierce has just been a non-factor in both games. Now, granted, they've been down, but the efficiency with Dameon Pierce has not been good.
2.6 yards per carry.
Yeah, not good at all. So, like you said, CJ Stroud is going to be, or I should say, he's still going to be a one-read guy, or whoever's just going to get open the quickest. And in my opinion, it's going to be Tank Dell and Nico Collins.
For sure. For sure. Alrighty, I'm going to transition to talk about a running back now, but we're going to go back to the Rams. And I want you to hear me when I say this. I don't want you to overreact. Kyren Williams could be a running back one with continued usage. So if we see what we've seen over the first 2 weeks and that continues, he could be an RB1 just based off of usage alone. Does it for sure continue? That's kind of where, a little bit back and forth, but I do think it's promising just what we've seen. He's played last week. He played 95% of snaps. He had 10 targets. He has 4 touchdowns on the year already. He has run 80 routes so far this year, and he has 15 carries in each game. And there was no Cam Akers, and it sounds like Cam Akers is gone. And the backup is Ronnie Rivers, who is definitely not going to take over the starting running back role. But there are guys like Kareem Hunt, Leonard Fournette, who are still in free agency who can come in. So I think that's probably the main reason I'm hesitant to say, Kyren Williams is a running back one moving forward. I also want to point out the Rams are running 78 plays per game. The Bucs last year ran the most plays per game at 68. So this is going to come down. This is not a sustainable pace, and they're doing it without Cooper Kupp. So I don't think this is something they quite stay at the entire season. But I do think that Kyren Williams is going to be a guy who could finish as a top 15 back just off of volume alone. We've seen Sean McVay commit to a running back and just give him volume, even if he's not great, aka Cam Akers at the end of last season. But the thing I think is a little worrisome for Kyren Williams is we've also seen Sean McVay giving someone a ton of volume, and then all of a sudden they're just gone. And they're like, you know what? I'm going to just give it to another guy. And Kyren Williams doesn't exactly have the draft capital that a Cam Akers had. He was, I think, a 6th-round pick, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was a 5th or 6th round pick.
Yeah, so day 3 pick. But if he can continue to play as he has, if he's running the routes, I think he's going to be a start moving forward until we're proven that he's not going to maintain this, because he was supposed to be a sit of the week candidate against the 49ers this week. And he proved, you know what, it might not always be pretty, but I'm going to get enough volume to be productive moving forward. Ty, any more thoughts on this Rams backfield?
Not really. I mean, it is really as straightforward as Kyron Williams is the guy.
Yep.
We probably aren't going to see 2 touchdowns per game like
No.
we have been seeing. But that being said, there's still value in having the running back 1 for any team. I mean, I've made that argument for Zach Moss, made the argument for Matt Breida as he's on waivers, and now that Saquon's out 2 to 3 weeks. Like, there's value with these guys, and it's just, it's a matter of debate then between you and your league mates, like how much value do they actually have?
Yep, for sure. Alrighty, Ty. Let's talk about these Philadelphia Eagles a little bit. There was a lot going on, a lot to dissect from that game. So where are you going to start us with these Eagles?
Well, I just want to start off by asking the question, like, what are the Philadelphia Eagles? Like I think a very common phrase that you hear a lot of people use especially at the beginning of the season is like, this team has no identity. Is that true for Philly? I mean, like, I feel like your identity is that you are the reigning NFC champions. And yes, you did lose Shane Steichen. Yes, you did lose Jonathan Gannon, but you still have talent for days, right? Mm-hmm. That being said, though, it does matter that you lose Shane Steichen. It does matter that you lose Jonathan Gannon. So looking at this year and what we're going to see down the road, we're going to see a pretty heavy rushing attack because that sets up RPO. That's a Nick Sirianni thing. It sets up play action for Jalen Hurts, where you can find A.J. Brown down the field, just like we saw last year. When we look at the Eagles-Vikings game, and yes, DeAndre Swift had 28 carries, 175 rushing yards, and a touchdown or something. I just want to say this first about DeAndre Swift. If it was a consensus opinion to play him, he would have just gone for 4 carries and 25 yards. That's literally just how things work.
Yeah.
So there were some people that reeled like this guy. So I should I'm kidding. But we can't necessarily take this one game as gospel for the Eagles moving forward, because I was saying to Cam and Lucas during the game, the Vikings had to make a choice. It was either take away any kind of rushing ability or opportunity for Jalen Hurts, or take away the run game in general, take away the backfield. I understand the choice to take away Jalen Hurts. They bottled Jalen Hurts up really, really well. And that caused some issues then in the passing game. And they could, Devontae Smith had 2 really big catches and Dallas Goedert finally got going in receptions and whatnot. But this game was literally a death by 1,000 paper cuts. The Vikings had to sacrifice something. And they decided, if we're going to be beat, we're going to be beat by DeAndre Swift in the running game. Now, not great for the Vikings, as Vikings fans, because you do look at the best offensive line versus arguably one of the worst defensive lines in the league. Probably not a recipe for success, but you can understand why the Vikings did what they did. The other takeaway, I touched on it just a second ago. The passing game is just off. Yes, Devontae Smith caught 2 deep balls, one that went for a score. He's been the most productive so far. A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert are still kind of stuttering along. They haven't fully taken off just yet. And you can look at targets and snap count and be like, oh, it'll get going, right? But I think we need to start asking the question, is this process going to take even longer than we expect for them to fully get going until we see the same kind of efficiency that we saw last year out of the Eagles? So I don't think we need to panic at all when it comes to, any Eagles player that you have on your fantasy team, right? A.J. Brown, if anything, is a super great buy low option right now. Devontae Smith is still going to produce. Dallas Goedert is still going to be a top 5 tight end in fantasy. Jalen Hurts, Jalen Hurts and his rushing upside. The question that we got to ask is, okay, is it Kenneth Gainwell? Is it DeAndre Swift? Probably more of a split backfield now. So again, this Eagles offense will get better, but it may not be a sudden 1 week adjustment is going to fix all the problems. It's probably still going to be a couple more weeks. So go buy low on a AJ Brown, go buy low on a Dallas Goedert, because once they do hit their stride, we're going to see a ton of fantasy production from them.
Yeah, I think that's just the biggest takeaway is the Eagles went, hey, the Vikings aren't going to be able to stop the run, so why would we throw the ball? And, I don't blame them. Way Flores played the defense, they played a deep zone the entire, they played the soft zone the entire time. They didn't want to let them get anything downfield. So, like you said, it's just death by 1,000 paper cuts. And you know what? AJ Brown, he was upset last week's, and he's the one being paid all the money out of all their what's the word? Wide receivers. What I don't remember. What is the word I'm looking for? Okay, never mind. I'm blanking. But he's the one being paid all the money. If he, causing a little stink on the sideline, I think they're going to try to get him involved. And this secondary is banged up and not quite as good as they were last year. So I think they are going to have to throw the ball more than they have in the past, or wanted to in the past. So I do think that is something to keep in mind. And before we move on to our next takeaway, we're going to take a short break and hear from our friends over at Underdog.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
And we're back. I'm just trying to do my best Lucas impression. Me and Ty talked during a quick break, and skill position players was the word that I was looking for. Ty thought I was going a different direction with this.
I thought he was just absolutely going to trash AJ Brown.
And no, I did not want to do that. We weren't on speaking terms after the game. We weren't ever on speaking terms, but he did ruin my three plays of the week. So that was
same here.
That was tough. But we're going to transition now. We're going to move to the quarterback position and talk about a guy who is not elite, and that is Justin Fields, who has looked bad these last 2 games. He has taken multiple bad sacks. I don't know if you've seen the clip that's floating around where he missed right over the seam, ran right into the defensive line. He is the QB 15 on the season so far, behind Baker Mayfield. 4 turnovers to 3 touchdowns. He's only averaging 210 yards a game, but I will say I don't think it's all on him. He has only 1 designed run on the year and a 60% completion percentage. He had the most yards of any quarterback in design runs last year, and so far they've given him 1. He ran the ball 4 times last game for 3 yards. So for a guy who is struggling to get going and excels on the ground, you would think as an offensive coordinator you might go, hey, let's run the ball. But what worries me a little bit about Justin Fields is he is heading to play in Kansas City. He then plays Washington and then plays in Denver. And I know Washington and Denver just kind of blew up the score in this last game, but both got pretty decent defenses and both got pretty good pass rushes. And I think that's something that could give Justin Fields some trouble over these next 3 games. He does get Minnesota then after that, but yeah, it's just not looking great for Justin Fields. And I think there's a lot of people in this Bears organization who might be going, did we make a mistake trading out of the 1 spot and keeping Justin Fields? I obviously still think he has fantasy value moving forward,
yeah.
Right? He is so dangerous on the ground. He's a guy who can put up, 20 fantasy points just from running the ball. And there may be 3 quarterbacks who can do that. So obviously you're not dropping him or anything, but it is starting to get a little worrisome seeing, he just looks a little bit lost out there, and I don't know. Has me a little bit worried. Do you have any thoughts on Justin Fields, Ty?
This was it was a suspicion that I had going into the season that when you trade back from the first overall pick and in the package that you get DJ Moore, that's a signal that you want to throw from the pocket a little bit more and not have Justin Fields be a running back essentially for your team. And we probably didn't talk about it enough, but the question that should have been talked about more or should have been asked more was, is Justin Fields going to be like a competent thrower? And he has not been passing the eye test so far. Like I don't want to keep going back to my waiver video but I brought up Roschon Johnson because I was like, they might slowly go back into this rushing attack for their offense. That bodes well for Roschon Johnson, but in the context of Justin Fields, that's where he's going to thrive the most. I honestly would not be surprised if we see Justin Fields get like, or have at like 9-10 rushing attempts against Kansas City, because let's be real. I know Kansas City hasn't been playing great, but Kansas City against Chicago, Kansas City is going to put up points. And if Chicago wants to be in the game, have any chance of knocking them off, they are going to need Justin Fields to run the ball. So you could look at Justin Fields as a buy low option right now, because I don't think it gets as low as this. Personally, I'm not going to, because I know I've got better quarterback situations, but I understand the logic or the argument of, well, Justin Fields will bounce back. Sure, go ahead. But just know that if you are going to do so, just know that it has not been pretty so far.
For sure. Alrighty, so we're transitioning from one quarterback who has struggled to another quarterback in offense that has struggled. Ty, can you talk to us a little bit about these Bengals?
The Bengals don't look good. And I will jump to this conclusion. The Bengals are in crisis. Okay. Joe Burrow has been struggling, and it's been affecting Jamar Chase so far. And I don't think it's necessarily all Joe Burrow's fault, but you can definitely tell that something is not right with Joe Burrow, and it's more likely than not his calf injury. So again, we can't necessarily put all of the struggle for the Bengals on Joe Burrow, because the defense has also been a little leaky. But the other part of this that hasn't been talked about like at all, at least in just my circles, this Bengals offensive line is hot garbage.
Yeah.
Like, it is brutal.
And they have been for a
while.
while.
They have been. And they went out and signed Orlando Brown. And I don't know why, but a lot of people instantly just kind of assume that, oh yeah, that's just going to solve everything. Orlando Brown wasn't that great when he played for Kansas City. But so far this year, this offensive line per PFF is graded the third worst pass blocking offensive line, which doesn't help Joe Burrow, who's already playing on a bad calf. And they're also the sixth worst run blocking offensive line. That is a theme that goes back to last year, even, because we saw just really bad, efficiency from Joe Mixon. That's kind of continued into this year. So between Burrow's injury, between bad offensive line play, between a leaky defense, it's the perfect storm. And when it rains, it pours. And Cincinnati has got to figure it out quick. Maybe it means sitting Burrow for a game so he can actually, instead of playing at 80-85%, he can play at 90-95%. Because I think that can make a difference. But I will say this: hope you didn't panic on T. Higgins, because the guy came through. He scored twice.
Yeah, he did 2 touchdowns.
Yeah. Don't panic. Don't panic on those guys. Again, back to the Bengals. Hopefully they can figure it out, because if they don't and this continues, you wasted a top 3 draft pick, more than likely, maybe top 5 on Jamar Chase. T. Higgins, who you spent third-round capital on, is going to be inconsistent. Joe Burrow, who you probably spent fourth-round draft capital on, isn't going to be producing like a top 5 quarterback. It's just not going to be pretty for the Bengals. So hopefully they turn it around, but let's just say we're going through some growing pains right now with the Bengals.
Yeah, you got to think they do. We know how good just this offense can be. So you got to think they start to figure it out. But I do agree. I think a big part of it is probably Joe Burrow's injury, his lack of willingness to want to move around. But he did have a very uncharacteristic pick that he threw in the red zone.
Oh, that was a bad pick.
Yeah, it just wasn't a great read. So, but you also got to think, I mean, he didn't play at all in the preseason, so it's going to take a little bit of time to get back into the swing of things. This just the way these things work. He is questionable going into next week. So that is something to watch. Maybe they keep him out as precautionary. Jamar Chase already said, I'd rather have him sit out for the first 5 weeks than try and force it. So this is definitely a situation to watch, but I would not panic. And if somebody is panicking on Jamar Chase, I think this is the time where you go in and you buy low.
You buy talent. And
yes.
It's a slippery slope because we know when we have been called out for saying it is time to sell Kyle Pitts, and people have been like, actually, it's time to go buy on Kyle Pitts because you buy talent. Because you also have to take into account scheme, play calling, all that kind of stuff. But it's the Bengals.
Yeah.
Okay? You're buying talent. Jamar Chase, one of the best talents.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
Yeah, and he's connected to Joe Burrow, who is a little different than being connected to a Marcus Mariota or Desmond Ridder.
Right.
But speaking of the Falcons,
hey,
Bijan Robinson has arrived. He leads all running backs in receptions. He is averaging 6.2 yards per carry on just under 15 attempts per game, and he is second behind CMC by 80 rushing yards. Just by the way, I just want to point out how good CMC has been. But he is second in rushing yards, and he was clearly the better back. For those people who were like, oh, well, Algier scored 2 touchdowns week 1. If you watched the game last week, he was the better back. He was playing so well that they went forward on their own, I think 18-yard line on 4th and 1, and ran the ball with Bijan on an outside run. And he just made Green Bay linebackers look silly all day yesterday. Play after play. When he's in open space, the dude's magical. Even when he's not in open space, even when they have him dead to rights, he is never down. Mm-hmm. He does, we talked about, could he be like rookie year Saquon? He's starting to give those vibes right now. Every time that ball's in his hands, it is special. He is, that in coming weeks, he's going to really start breaking a 70, 80-yard run here or there, and it's just really going to put him over the top. I think him and Christian McCaffrey are the only 2 running backs right now who have had 20 points per game, or 20 points in each of the first 2 games. So yeah, Bijan has arrived. And Ty, I know you agree with that, but I know that you have some frustrations about the rest of the Falcons offense. So I just want to give you some time to just unleash those frustrations. Just let us know where you're at.
Arthur Smith. Get your crap together. I'm kidding. I'm not going to go in that serious, but it is kind of problematic where we get to the red zone and we're not putting Drake London on the field. And instead, we'd rather run Mac Hollins, Jonnu Smith, and Kyle Pitts. And I get that Kyle Pitts can be a bigger slot receiver if you want to put him there. Why the heck? And I know Drake London just produced this week. Like, he put up six catches, 67 yards, and a touchdown. But you spent top 10 draft capital on Drake London to be your do-it-all guy. You did not draft him top 10 because of his size and his ability to block in the run game. That is baloney. That's stupid. That is beyond stupid. I know that Arthur Smith wants to run the ball at all costs. I get that, and I will accept that. But keeping Drake London off the field in those kind of situations, again, where we're in the red zone and Mac Hollins is getting the call, it's infuriating. And I was saying to Cam before we started, I've been on record saying that Kyle Shanahan is the most frustrating coach to guess when it comes to fantasy football, because you could think one week, oh, this will be a Christian McCaffrey week, and it's a George Kittle week. And then you're like, well, George Kittle has the right matchup. Then it's a Brandon Ayuk week, right? That's the Kyle Shanahan thing. Arthur Smith, same thing. You think it could be a great opportunity for Drake London to be on the field, and he's getting out. I shouldn't say outsnapped, but all I'm saying is that it is going to be a very frustrating year with this Falcons offense. And the one silver lining, the one saving grace is Bijan Robinson, because he looks the part. He's going to get more and more carries as we get further on into the season, because that's the trend, is to not just, unless you're a quarterback, to not give the full workload to a rookie right away. So again, it's going to be frustrating, but Bijan is so freaking good. He is so freaking good.
Yeah, it's frustrating that you would draft two pass catchers, two of the best pass catchers in each draft, top 10, and you just go, I'm not going to use them. The hope is going to be this next week. They're playing in Detroit, that Detroit is going to put up enough points that they have to throw the ball. But man, it's got to feel like Arthur Smith is the only 2-0 head coach that people are like people are frustrated with right now, because man, it just doesn't make sense to not try it, even attempt to use these guys in meaningful ways. Obviously, Drake London was bailed out by the touchdown yesterday, but if you have Kyle Pitts right now, you're sitting in no man's land. You really are.
Yeah.
But talking about some wide receivers that have had some ups and downs in the first 2 weeks, we got these Jags wide receivers. We went from the full panic button on Christian Kirk to now Christian Kirk's putting up a fantastic game, and Zay Jones has 0 points. Ty, what do we make of this? What is going on with Jacksonville?
Oh, it is. It's crazy. It's craziness. Christian Kirk leads all Jags wide receivers in receiving after getting shut out, but getting only 1 catch in week 1. Calvin Ridley, 8 targets, but only 2 catches. So not great. Maybe there was a lot more pressure in Trevor Lawrence's face as to why he couldn't deliver the ball enough. I don't know. Zay Jones having 6 targets, 2 or 3 in the red zone, where they
in the end zone.
Yeah, like they could have been touchdowns, but he didn't get a second foot in. Here's what you need to know for Jacksonville wide receivers moving forward. It really depends on the package that is on the field at the time. 2 wide receiver sets. Who are the 2 wide receivers that are going to be on the field? This was evident back in week 1, and it pretty much was confirmed in week 2. It's going to be Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones. When they are going 3 wide receiver sets, that's where you can expect Christian Kirk to get some to produce a little bit. I'll put it that way. That happened this week because Christian Kirk, 11 receptions, 14 targets, 110 yards. And Doug Peterson kind of hinted at it when he said that Christian Kirk would play more again when they're going up against defenses that play a lot more man coverage and get more opportunities. And that's exactly what happened against Kansas City. Unfortunately, they only put up 9 points, which can I just say, that was probably one of the most disappointing games.
Oh, yes.
of the week.
Highest over-under of the week, and it just was disappointing.
It fell flat on its face. Like, it was not pretty at all. So, again, if you're trying to figure out which Jaguars wide receiver is going to produce which weeks and whatnot, just know Calvin Ridley is the main guy. He's going to be consistent throughout everything. Zay Jones is going to see some red zone opportunities over Christian Kirk and is going to be on the field more in 2 wide receiver sets. And you typically will see 2 wide receiver sets against teams that don't play a whole lot of man coverage. When you see 3 wide receiver sets with Christian Kirk on the field, that means the defense plays more man coverage. And there are tools and websites out there that will that can help you, find out which defenses run more man and more zone.
Yeah.
So all you got to do is just Google and just roll with it. But it's weird to say this, and this is what I was trying to say earlier. Calvin Ridley, matchup proof. Zay Jones, Christian Kirk are matchup dependent, and that stinks because Christian Kirk was so good last year, but this is just the reality that we find ourselves in right now.
Yeah, and you brought it up. Zay Jones missed 2 in the end zone. Calvin Ridley had 1 in the end zone, and I think there was another shot to the end zone. There was 4 passes that the Jaguars had where receiver only got 1 foot in bounds. So, I mean, it's a very different week if that happens all of a sudden. Calvin Ridley's, you're feeling better about his week. Zay Jones could have had 2 touchdowns. He did see 6 targets, but he ends up with a goose egg. So these are the underlying things that we're talking about. Like last week, we were talking about T. Higgins saw 8 targets. That's a big underlying thing. So that's why this week when he popped off, we're not surprised about it. So you got to look at more than just the fantasy points that you see. Yeah. Anything quick to add, Ty, before we head on to our last takeaway?
Take it away.
All righty. The last person I'm going to talk about is Josh Jacobs, and he has struggled on the ground. He's averaging 1.6 yards per carry. The only player worse is Cam Akers, and Akers wasn't even allowed to play week 2. So that should tell you all that you need to know. He's had 28 rush attempts and only 46 yards. The only reason he's had any, fantasy relevance is he has 7 catches for 75 yards, which is something we saw last year. That was a reason that, he moved from a fringe top 12, top 10 guy up into that running back 3 or 4 conversation, was that receiving work. So it's good to still see that. But the question then becomes, is it time to worry about Josh Jacobs, the rushing leader from last year, or is it just rust? And I think it can be a little bit of both. I think that there is definitely going to be rust, right? You're not playing in any games. You're not at practices. You can work out as much as you want on your own, but how much is that actually comparing to what you're doing when you're in the NFL facility, when you're at the Raiders facility? And so those are all things you got to keep in mind. I talked about it a little bit this offseason. My worry for Josh Jacobs is last year was more of an anomaly for his career, right? We haven't seen that big breakout yet. We saw that last year, but that was more of, something we hadn't seen before. So maybe he does take a little bit of a step back. So I think we could see small regression, right? I'm not saying he goes from 1,600 yards to 900 rushing yards. I still think, he's 1,000-yard back this season, probably pushing 1,200 yards when he gets going. But I also think it's going to take a little bit to get going. And this offense is looking a little bit new under Jimmy G, so teams are going to try and make Jimmy G beat them, right? Last year, Derek Carr could throw the ball down the field, and, he's been known for that. He might be a little chaotic doing it, but he's been known as a good enough passer, whereas Jimmy G, is kind of, teams are like, is he just good at handing the ball off, or is he actually a good quarterback? So they're going to test him. They're going to see what's going on. So I think it's a little bit of both. How are you feeling about Josh Jacobs, Ty?
I am still trying to decide in my head if he's a buy low or if he is someone to just avoid. Mm-hmm. And when those two thoughts are in my head, the question then that I have to answer first is, well, then what are my thoughts in the offense? And I know that Vegas won in week 1.
Yeah.
But that wasn't gross. It was gross. Yep. It was gross. And going into Buffalo and just getting smacked 38-10, like, this offense is not going to be pretty, like, at all. And I keep going back to, I think it was this offseason and earlier in the offseason when Devontae Adams had said, like, I don't necessarily agree with the direction that we're going in the offense and stuff like that. And that's not a direct quote, but that was the gist of the quote, essentially. Mm-hmm. Is this what we were kind of talking about a little bit? And we can't pinpoint at least I can't right now pinpoint exactly what he's referring to and what the step back is, or the setback is. But there's something wrong there. This Raiders offense is just not clicking yet. Do I think they can click? Sure. But what does it look like when they click? Mm-hmm. And to me, my initial response is like, it's not worth investing in. Like, it's not, when I say investing in, it's not worth like going out and trading for. Like, the one player I could accept is Devontae Adams, because he's that good no matter what. Yeah, right. You know he's that good, But even with Devontae Adams, like there's a fear in my head of like Jacoby Myers, Josh McDaniels, and Jimmy Garoppolo all used to be on the Patriots.
Yeah.
So there's trust and there's a rapport there that Devontae doesn't have just yet. Like, so again, my thing with the Raiders is just like I know Josh Jacobs performed really well last year. I know Devontae Adams performed really well last year. I'm not really going and acquiring any Raiders players because I just don't want to emotionally invest in this offense.
I do think you bring up a good point that not every player who has a bad week or two is a buy low, right? Not every guy who is a buy low. We talk about T. Higgins, who was a buy low because he had 8 targets still. Dallas Goedert was a proven tight end last year, right? Josh Jacobs has played well, but if you're in week 4 and he's still doing this, that doesn't make him a buy low. I mean, obviously it depends how low you can buy him, right? If you can buy him for Zach Moss, then obviously you're buying him. But most 99.9% of leagues, that's not going to happen. But it is that is something that we are going to need to continue to watch. But that wraps up our top 10 takeaways. We did not say this earlier. I should have said this earlier. This was recorded before Monday Night Football. So it is currently 6:05 p.m. Eastern time. Lucas always gives us Central, so I need to give the Eastern time shout out. Establish my dominance on here. And but yeah, so we are recording before Monday Night Football. So Carolina, New Orleans, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh
can I just say I hope I'm proven wrong, but both of these games are just not the finale that I want this week to be, because this week has been awesome. Between just blowouts, high scoring games, comebacks, all that stuff. But
for sure,
not the Monday night I want to end week 2 on.
For sure. Real quick then, again, before we go, check out Tys' waiver wire video that came out on Monday, yesterday, when you receive this before your waiver wires run, so you know what to do. I got a buy low video coming out tomorrow. Podcast again on Thursday, best and worst matchups for week 3. And then Lucas has a must start video, plus all of our short form content. Guys, we have so much for you, and we don't want you to miss out. Tyler, do you got any last words for the people before we sign off?
In the words of my good friend, Cameron Lawrence.
Oh, you want to be...
I forgot how it goes.
Keep fighting the good fight.
There it is.
But sorry about that. We need our producer to cut it.
We have to restart this whole episode.
No, yep. Well, this might be up Thursday, but we'll give you a new one. All righty. Thank you guys for joining us. And with that, deuces.